Hello and welcome to a rare video. It's a layout comparison featuring the Nova versus the Nova. Typically, I don't mess with layouts, mostly because it helps to create consistency from video to video, and for comparisons, I have a symmetric layout and I have an asymmetric layout. They work pretty well, so I don't really feel like I need to mix anything up, and I rarely drill multiples of anything since I drill so many to begin with. We're watching footage from the original review here, and it's really good. However, the cover wants to be both long and sharp, but the core wants to be rolly and tumbly, and since my typical layout is pretty neutral across the board, it kind of ended up leaving me in between on the ball reaction. Then once it began to shine up, that was exaggerated, so it didn't quite fit. It felt like the ball was almost fighting against itself for me with that layout. The friction response would force me inside, then it wanted to be rolly and slow. To specifically compare the layouts, 4 3/4 by 3.5 by 3.5 on my first Nova is my typical asim layout that I have on every other reactive asymmetric ball that I've drilled for the last year. You heard me reference the difference when comparing the RSTX1 to the X3, and I explained that my previous layout of 5 by 3.5 by 2.5 that I used on the X1 and all the other asims before it made the ball want to be more dynamic and sharper on friction, but also straighten out a little at the same time. I liked the general overall reaction, but it tended to lock up and or stand up on me when it hit friction. With my current layout, it splits the gap between pin up and pin down. It's not as dynamic as pin up, but not as slow or smooth as pin down, while increasing the strength of the pin a tiny bit to nudge it towards being more continuous. So what this gets me is a pin to pap on the long side of medium that's right on the line of continuous versus beginning to lose axis rotation. Any longer than that and the ball wants to begin losing axis rotation faster and straightening out, which can be helpful for heavier hands, bigger rev rates to keep the ball from going nuts. Chris Barnes famously likes longer pin to paps so he can control the shape off the end of the pattern with his hand positions rather than having the ball itself just want to pick up and continue too much. Now, I don't have Chris Barnes revs, so I want a little more natural strength and continuation out of the layout, but I don't want it super early and grindy either. The second number describing the PSA to PAP is quite strong. It gives me that strong mid lane control and tumble to make sure it starts winding up strong in the mid lane. The final number of the pin buffer at 3.5 again is right in the middle. It's not as quick and responsive on friction as pin up, but not as slow and blendy as pin down. Going sideways into the reason for this new layout when it came to the Rubicon UC3, which I've recently discovered as my uncontested benchmark ball. Because it's a urethane blend, despite being asymmetric, I drilled it stronger than I normally would have to try and make it more dynamic. So I went with 4.5 by 3.5 by 2.5. Not much stronger on the pin, same PSA to PAP because that's already strong enough. Then I went back to pin up because with urethane naturally being slow and smooth, I didn't want to lean into that any further. Also being asymmetric, it was going to be early and strong too, so I wanted to try to produce some extra aggression and shape to go along with it to make it a beast, and mission definitely accomplished. With James and Angel's heavy use of their Novas, I've become more familiar with the overall reaction and recognized a similarity between the rolls. The UC3 has the same strong, tumbly, continuous motion, just obviously tamer and more subdued by the cover, and naturally that makes it a little too smooth and slow sometimes. I had an exceptionally well-thrown set the other day. My first ball average was 9.4, but I had 13 single pins, most of those being flat or ring 7s. Now, despite making moves and adjustments throughout, the general ball reaction was great, but not completely effective. Getting to the pocket repeatedly is great, but you have to get the ball through the pins correctly. You can't just hang your hat on the fact that you're hitting the pocket while complaining about your carry. I had the thought that the Nova rolled like the UC3, but would of course give me a little more length and shape for those times when the UC3 is feeling its urethane side a little more and would be a solid complement, but not with my previous layout on it. The ignition core from the Nova is very strong, but with the cover being medium strength, I thought the same layout I used on the UC3 would actually work in this case, and I think you can already tell that it does. As you might notice, I filmed for the new layout Nova at the same time I filmed my latest UC3 video because again, for me, this was the point or idea. The UC3 has quickly become my default benchmark, but again, sometimes it's going to be a little slow. Typically, I wouldn't drill any asymmetric reactive ball this strong. This is a very strong and dynamic layout, which would normally be too much for the majority of asims and conditions I bowl on, but based on what I was after, what I experienced with the first layout on my Nova and my UC3 layout, I thought in this specific case that it would work perfectly, and I was right. Now, it is borderline strong to the point that I could be in danger of it being too early and rolling out or giving up if dealing with a typical asymmetric cover strength. However, the reaction I'm getting once again proves you shouldn't get too far inside your own head, because this is exactly what I was after. Now, this isn't the kind of layout you'd normally use to chase a shot deeper. If that was the idea, most of the time you're going for a longer pin, weaker PSA to PAP, and if you've got a higher rev rate, maybe you even go pin down to keep the ball from being so early and locking up. You want it to get down the lane and let your revs do the work. The earlier a ball gets moving, the slower it's going to be down lane, and that's not a good recipe for covering boards. However, in my case, average revs, average speed, no track on the left side of the lane, or no early track friction that's going to make the ball start picking up too early or burning up. A strong layout on a tumbly core that's going to make it keep climbing, and the piece that makes this all click is the medium strength cover. It's not digging too early, and with it not being a huge cover, it's not going to give up so quickly on friction. This cover is built for more friction rather than more oil, so it handles friction significantly better than some of the stronger covers that are designed to get through the oil and create their own friction. So it blends it better and uses the friction to get going. You can see it slowing down when it hits the friction, but instead of bogging down, burning up, or giving up, it starts walking back up and continues to continue. This is what I wanted. I wanted that same strong, tumbly roll that I get from the UC3, but that is sharper, stronger, and more dynamic overall. As a bonus, if it's a good look and I have to chase it deeper, I can do that with this ball rather than having to go to something else. Adding my original back in, you can see it goes longer and is sharper. With the layout adjustment of the new one, you saw that I could play straighter more easily. It gets the ball started up earlier, which also makes it a little slower down lane. However, it also lets me get deep pretty easily too, because I can put it into the friction early and let it walk up rather than having a longer and stronger look that might make me fight a little with angle control, especially as it shines up. Both are good looks, but there are obviously some small tweaks and adjustments you can make to really fine-tune things in your favor. Realistically, this is a small adjustment. At surface value, it may not seem like a big deal, but what it's done is make this a ball I'll throw more often rather than something that's a little more niche. I had to keep the surface on my original to maintain the shape I wanted to see, but that made it a little too strong for regular use when also combined with the sharper friction response. The new one already allows me more freedom with my angles, and as it shines up, I'm sure it'll improve my look even further, in addition to making it exactly what I wanted, a longer and sharper version of my UC3. Just to further illustrate my point, let's go back again to the UC3. Obviously smoother and weaker, but you can see the familiarity in what I'm talking about. These are things people miss when they hold too closely to their preconceived ideas about what things are or should be based on what they look like on paper. On paper, a pearl urethane mild asymmetric ball shouldn't be anywhere close to a hybrid reactive full asymmetric ball if you subscribe to the conventional wisdom, but if you pay attention to what the details say and what the overall ball reaction says, you arrive at this. The Nova being an obviously related and complementary look to the UC3. Now I have a great look for the fresh and to control friction response with the UC3, and a delta off of that to give me a similar look on a little more volume or when the back ends soften up with the Nova. Big shout out and thanks to all my Patreon members and great Discord community. Thank you for watching, and may the strikes be with you.